Hello and welcome. I am Barry Rosen from Communica. You've tuned into an exciting event focused on virtual selling, the new reality, and this is the first event in Communica's Think series for 2021, and we thank you for joining us. As we try to start this new year off strongly, we're all faced with lingering challenges from last year. Foremost among them, at least for those of us in marketing and sales roles, is the ongoing and perhaps permanent shift to virtual selling. While a digital migration has been advancing for years now, the events of 2020 accelerated it and intensified it, literally forcing all companies to transform to digital. For many, particularly B2B companies, this transformation demands new knowledge, skills, and priorities. Well, we're fortunate today to have two exceptional experts to help us that. John Asher is the CEO of Asher Strategies, a Washington, D.C. based organization that provides sales advisory services to clients from startups to Fortune 500 companies. John is the author of two best-selling books on sales, 2018's Close Deals Faster, which is in the top 3% of all books ever sold on Amazon, and 2020's The Neuroscience of Selling. John has trained over 80,000 salespeople from 22 countries, and he's the recipient of the Lifetime Speaker Achievement Award from Vistage. John Edwards is an executive vice president and partner here at Communica. John focuses on B2B sales enablement through the integration and implementation of best practice marketing tools, tactics, and technologies. Throughout his career, John has worked with some of the world's leading brands to increase their digital presence, including AOL, Netscape, Apple, Time Warner, Walmart, CNN, and others. We're all looking forward to hearing from John and John. Before we get started, let me cover a couple of housekeeping issues. You are participating in listen-only mode, so if you have a question during the event, please use the question area in your control panel. And we will do our best to address questions throughout the presentation, and there will be a Q&A session before we wrap up. This webinar will be recorded, and following the event, a link of the recording will be sent to you. Now, it is my pleasure to turn things over to John Asher.
Hello, all. Great to be with you all, even if we're only virtual. I've been to the Detroit area, Columbus, Toledo, many times in my career, working, of course, with the great folks from Communica and with Vistage members and also private companies. So great to be back with you. Now, before I start, I want to mention one cognitive bias that relates to this presentation. It's one of the ones described in my book in The Neuroscience of Selling, and it's called the base rate neglect bias. And base rate means a lot of data. So to give you an example of this, when I was a kid, my mother used to rag on her brother, Uncle Joe. Joe, you got to quit smoking, it's going to kill you. And Uncle Joe would reply, Nance, my mother's name, you know, Aunt Sue smoked 2 packs a day and she lived to 92, so what's the big deal? Well, if back then Uncle Joe could have Googled, if you're a heavy smoker, how many years do you lose on average? Google would immediately do 11 epidemiology studies, put them together, and the answer would be 11 years. So the reason I'm going to telling you about that bias is what I'm going to show you, and John Edwards is going to show you, is not just our opinion. It's an integration of multiple studies by many prestigious organizations shown here. Now, John and I and Barry agree with all of this, but we didn't invent this. It's just a result of all these studies. Now let's drop back and take a quick look at the previous recessions. I hate to admit this, but I've been an adult in every one of these, and for the last 3, I've been a CEO. And of course, we all know, because of the yellow highlighted things at the bottom of the slide, this is a special one. This is a once in a 100-year recession because of these trends that are involved here. Now, McKinsey has done a look back at the last 3 recessions And they've come up with a number of lessons learned from recessions, shown here. So quickly take a look when the recession starts at what we're spending money on. Get rid of the excessive spending. Get lean everywhere except in sales and marketing investments, and increase those for obvious reasons. Look at all of our processes, improve them, sharpen the saw for everybody in the company. It's a great time to hire new salespeople. In normal times, you can't get the great ones, but in recessions like this one, many of them are furloughed and it's not their fault, so it's easy to get them. It's a great time to buy weaker competitors. One of our customers in Tampa 2 recessions ago, during the 11 months of the recession, bought 6 smaller companies, came out twice as big, twice as strong. And then maybe the most important lesson from previous recessions is on the bottom of the slide. And that is the companies that rapidly came up with new products, new services, new processes, grew 4 times as fast as the companies who did not between the end of that recession and the next one. So these are the standard lessons learned that we get from recessions. Now let's see what's changing with the buyers. Number one, without a face-to-face meeting, the best way for a buyer to trust a salesperson or a new company is with a strong referral. So I know you all know this, referrals have always been important. Now they're extra important. They're almost required to get new business in a recession. And now that 60% of the buyers are millennials, and millennials don't particularly want to meet with salespeople, they actually don't want to meet at all with them. 44% of them buyers actually don't care about meeting with salespeople anymore, up from 20% in the previous generation. And the buyer's use of vendor mobile apps is up 100%. And all of them are essentially saying, we want to use these mobile apps, these self-service apps in the future. And buyers are buying big online. You can see for that next to last bullet, 25% of the buyers will buy up to $500,000 online without talking to a sales rep. And then, of course, because of all this, buyers want a great digital interaction with companies, and they value it much more than the old face-to-face. Some of the expectations for the future. Oops, I went too fast. So imagine this first bullet. 3 out of 4 buyers think that digital selling is more important, more useful than face-to-face, and they don't ever want to talk to a sales rep again. Just that one bullet has huge implications for the future. Most of them are liking the video meetups, the VC platforms better than a phone call. Many of them now want an automated demo of your products and service, not just a demo with the salesperson. And many of the reasons are many untrained salespeople don't have the skills in a demo with a buyer, keep trying to get the buyer to say yes, 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 and it comes across as stupid to the buyers because they don't know how to really do it. In many cases, trying to sell as they're going through the demo. In many cases, the demos are too long. So now buyers would much prefer, many of them, to have an automated demo. And since they're getting so used to virtual reality and augmented reality in their personal lives with fashion, Wayfair for furniture, gaming, they expect those technologies to be in our demos. And most of the buyers now are expecting this whole virtual world will be with us throughout 2021. From my own experience, trying to get one of these shots, it's so slow, rolling out so slowly is probably right. And 90% now, as the sellers shift their strategy, are other than face-to-face. When you survey the sales managers, they're saying, hey, 40% of them are saying, okay, all my field salespeople, the ones going around and got any ads today, and those types of people, all that's going to be shifted to virtual sales. And the Forrester Future of Sales 2025 report claims that in about 4 years, 80% of the interactions between salespeople and buyers will be through digital channels. Some of these major trends now that we see happening with the salespeople. So this whole shift to virtual selling, 4 out of 5 the salespeople like it. More than half of them find it more effective than face-to-face selling, and almost half of them want to maintain it throughout 2021. And salespeople working remotely are starting to like it and get used to it. All of them essentially want to be able to do some of it in the future. Almost half want to do it full time in the future. And 43% of the salespeople are starting to like this whole idea of flexible days and flexible hours, especially when both spouses are home and there's homeschooling involved. So it's the flexible hours and flexible days are almost mandatory now. And again, back to the future of sales 2025, some of this emerging reality is, again, 4 out of the 5 B2B interactions will be digital channels. And so again, the question comes up, in several years, how many salespeople will we need? What will their job functions be? And do they really need the same aptitude they need today? So lots of questions about salespeople for the future. Now, let's see what the buyers value from salespeople. There's always been personal characteristics that we buyers, I'm a buyer too, and many of you are buyers as well as salespeople, especially in your personal lives. So we always want to feel good about the salesperson, have that feeling of, from neuroscience, the feeling of similarity to build rapport. We want to like the salesperson if we're going to do business with them. Second, we want the salespeople to be honest, no BS, tell the truth. Third, we really want salespeople with a high degree of integrity. We want them to do what they say they're going to do it the way it should be done, and do it on time. And if they can't get it done on time or the way it should be done, let the buyer know, let us know. Take responsibility for the mess they may have created for us, the buyer, and tell us when they're going to get it done on time. So those 3 personal characteristics, the likability, the honesty, and the integrity, are always important to trust a salesperson. But it's never been enough, because even though we may like them and they're great people with great personal characteristics, if they don't know what they're talking about, if they're really not a subject matter expert or a thought leader and can't really help us with useful information, then they're out. So strong product knowledge has always been the 4th pillar for trusting a salesperson. Now there's a 5th factor. So when salespeople don't know how to set up a Zoom meeting, get the date, time zone wrong, don't know how to pull up a document like a proposal on a VC platform meeting, don't know how to modify it in real time, don't know how to get the buyer to sign the proposal electronically, then they're out. So buyers now expect salespeople to be technically proficient on these video meetups. They also expect salespeople to be good at problem solving and be creative. And the reason is for so many companies, their challenges now for the buyer in the company are different. And the challenges for their customers are different. So they need salespeople who can think out of the box to help them. And we're all social animals. We all like to get together with other people to one degree or the other. And many of us miss it. I totally miss not being able to do sales training in person, not get together with John and Barry in person. And salespeople think that on these VC platforms, you really can't build rapport, but you can, and you should. And I'll show you how to do it here in a bit. So when any recession starts, there's always 4 areas we salespeople should focus on in this order. Always focus on the current customers first. We can't afford to lose them. And in normal times, maybe half of our customers are kind of in automatic, don't need a lot of hand holding, and then the other half need a lot of attention. Well, when the recession starts, we have to pay attention to all of them. We can't afford to lose them. Second, focus on the prospects that were in our pipeline prior to the recession starting. So there may have been some prior to mid-March where we went to a ball game with them, maybe a mud hunt game, or maybe a meal. And so we have the rapport. It's just a matter of them continuing to go through their buying process with us. So focus on them next. And then third, half the companies have been doing well, half not so well. So focus on third on the companies that have been doing well. They have money, they're growing, they need help. And then fourth, as the companies that have not been doing well start to emerge, perhaps get a new PPP loan and have money to spend, then focus on them. So let's take a look at the third group. That is the companies that are doing well. And there are a number of them in these industries. And by the way, I've updated this list over the last 8 months, almost every month, because it does change. And you can see under the camera lens, there is a website you can go to take a look. And the reason we want to focus on these is data from previous recessions. The salespeople and their companies who got new customers in recessions were the most likely to really do well post-crisis. And we really need to focus on the deals we think we can win. And to give you a quick anecdote about that, after my 20 years in the submarine force, I was a buyer in the Pentagon for 5 years, managing a big software development program, nuclear submarine combat systems. And so I got a job in DC selling medical software up at the sea level, hospitals, HMOs, big companies. It went okay. And then about 3 months into the job, the VP of sales invited me to lunch. So we're just sitting down. We hadn't had anything to eat or drink yet. And he said, John, I just want to let you know that you are not properly focused. You have picked way too many prospects and you're not giving them enough touches. You don't have enough time. You've got to reverse this. You got to get down to a top few prospects and give them a lot of touches. And he had a saying, which I've never forgotten. It's another one of those cognitive biases called the rhyming bias. That is, our old brains are biased towards remembering things that rhyme much more than things that don't. So here was his statement. Money flows where focus goes. And so those of you who have been in business for a while realize it applies actually to all aspects of business. It's especially applicable to sales. So let's get a deal with these companies during this pandemic. There's three winners. The prospect gets what they need. We get a sale, and we get a lifetime customer. And then you can see in the third bullet, this is why it takes so much effort to get these sales in a recession from a new company. And you can see from these various studies how much more salespeople have to do to get these deals, even more reason to focus. And so there again, our own personal digital presence and our company's digital presence become much more important when we can't meet face to face. So now we're going to research a prospect. And when you watch the elite salespeople at work, by the way, from Harvard's data, there's two Pareto principles associated with salespeople. One, there's 25 million of them, and the top 20%, 5 million, are elite, and the 80% are not. And many don't have the right aptitude for sales, never been to sales training, for example. And the second 80-20 rule that applies is the top 20% bring in 80% of the new business. So when you watch the great salespeople at work, this is their recipe for research. Number one, they'll go to Google and research the prospect company. And they'll research the prospect's competition, association websites, Dun & Bradstreet. In normal times, we didn't have to research the competition, but now we do. They'll also research the buyer's background in Sales Navigator, so we can get information and do rapport building. And you can see here yellow highlighted, when you use Sales Navigator as opposed to just LinkedIn, you get a pretty good lift rate in closing. And in this pandemic, with no face-to-face essentially, 80% of the leads, business-to-business leads, start in LinkedIn. And then number three, discover the buyer's personality style with LinkedIn. I'm sorry, with Crystal Knows. So Crystal Knows is a website. If you've ever never used it, you go to the website, you put the buyer's name in, you put the buyer's company in, so you know you're getting the right person. Then smart software goes all throughout cyberspace and does word associations with their name and any word on any website that they've been to, any social media platform. If they've taken a disk profile, that's integrated in. And it comes back less than a second and tells you which of these four personality styles they are out to the right. And not only that, it tells you how to write an email customized to their style, how to leave a voicemail customized to their style, what you should and shouldn't say to them in person or on a VC call. So it actually gives salespeople the ability to operate at the highest level of emotional intelligence. Now, one of the interesting things about this data is if you go back to the 20 million not so hot salespeople, many of them are really great at selling to 25% of the prospects, meaning they're great at selling to people that are the same personality style they are. Back to the similarity bias from the neuroscience studies. In order to sell to the other 75%, you need the skills, you need the information. So you can see why Crystal Knows is such a brilliant tool. It gives you the ability to operate at the highest level of emotional intelligence. Example, if you're a thinker salesperson selling to a driver buyer and you bring in a stack of details to show to the buyer is bored before our butt hits the chair. And so because buyers that are drivers want salespeople to be concise, be brief, and be gone. If you're up there in the right, the green, the big talkers of the world are communicators, and you're in with a driver buyer and you can't shut up, then pretty soon the driver buyer's thinking to himself, shut up. Where are we going with this? But if you're a driver buyer selling to a communicator and you don't try to do rapport building at the beginning and just go right to your solution, you're out. So now once we've done all this research, let's propose a VC meeting to these qualified leads. Again, most buyers will want to do a VC meetup with you as opposed to a video meetup with you as opposed to a phone call, and give them a rationale for them to join. And when you watch the elite salespeople at work, once they agree to the meeting, whether it's a phone call, an in-person meeting, or a video meetup, then if you ask the elite salespeople, what's your process now with this qualified lead? How do you go from just meeting them to closing a deal? They all have the same process. The simple three-step process. First is build rapport for obvious reasons. We want them to like us. We want them to feel comfortable with us, so they'll share what's going on. And in this pandemic, this last bullet shows some of the best ways to build rapport that are still as important today as they were when the pandemic started. And that is express gratitude, ask a question, or show empathy and ask a question, or be authentic and ask a question. So for example, you don't have a Navy background. If a service member who has a service background is the seller and I'm the buyer, and they start with, I was in the Army Guard for 8 years, and I saw you were in the Navy. How was your Navy career? What was it good? And so that's going to be a big conversation. I mean, unless they're from Army, of course. Just kidding. And so make a statement about the empathy, the authenticity, and then just ask a question. And most people will respond. And then once we get into the needs analysis, once we've done all our research, then the average salespeople want to start with a presentation. The elite salespeople will do great research and they'll start with this. Here's our understanding of your needs, bullet, 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 and then ask a question. Do I have this about right? So now back to Harvard. The Harvard Sales Department, 42 years, and the Harvard Neuroscience Department, 7 years. Now they talk to each other. And so they collaborated on this, did functional MRI uh, with buyers on this. And so if you can pull this off in 95% of the cases, it causes a big conversation between the buyer and the seller. And after this conversation is over, how many slides in our slide deck of 21 slides do we have to show? Not too many. And if we're going to show 3 or 4, we know exactly which three or 4 to show based on this big conversation we had. So get the needs analysis going by getting them to talk about their challenges, what's going on. We may have to show a demo. And again, today buyers want an automated demo. Maybe they want an in-person demo. And you'll also see buyers asking for an automated demo with a salesperson in attendance. So they can watch it together. The buyer can have a question. The salesperson can pause the demo and answer the question. And we may have to differentiate ourselves. There's always been 4 ways to do, three main ways to differentiate. 1, have a unique selling proposition. 2, have a strong why or purpose for your company. 3, have great case studies or stories. And I think most of you know this, the great salespeople are the great storytellers. And from Harvard, there's a real architecture on how to tell these stories. And it usually includes the ROI that the customer got from using your services. Now there's a whole other way to differentiate yourself, which John Edwards will show you in a bit. And that is have a strong digital presence. So when you watch the companies who have all 4 of these, it's almost a slam dunk for them when they get to this part. Then offer a solution and think about closing the deal. So now, because of 2 factors, closing is a bit different than it's been in the past. Number 1 is because the uncertainty that buyers see about the future, very hard to predict, as we all know. And 2, because of the restricted cash flow that many buyers are suffering from. The closing is a bit different. I'll give you a few examples. The first one on the top left, in normal times, if we got a great new prospect, a new client, and they had great credit, we might offer them 30 days credit to pay. Now, to get those same deals, we have to offer 90 days. In many cases, for the memberships, for anything you have to pay, like technology, you have to pay an annual fee up front. Now, to close those deals, salespeople are being given the ability to offer monthly payments throughout the year. Salespeople selling the subscription model, about a third of the companies now, used to give us 15 or 30 days free trial. Now, if you sign a 3-year agreement for a subscription model, you can get 6 months free up front. In addition, for important software, new software, collaboration, cybersecurity, e-commerce, you're getting 90 days, try it free. And then finally, the last one on the top right, it goes back to another neuroscience principle. It's a cognitive bias called the single option aversion bias, meaning buyers are adverse to only buying one option. So if you only offer one option, not very many will take it. But if you offer 2 similar options, 6 times the closing rate because they can pick one. Their old brain can see a difference. So if you have one big product or one big system, think about skinning it down, lower fidelity, lower robustness at maybe a lower price point. So now you can offer the buyer 2 options. And many of you recognize this as the science behind the good, better, best offering. So now finally, everything's gone well. We've done great research. We've built rapport. We've done a great needs analysis. We've offered a solution, and the buyer says, great, send me a proposal. Here is the worst possible thing a salesperson could do, and that is email a proposal. And the reason is, who knows what the buyer's going to do with it? They might put it in a subfolder. They might send it out to 2 other people in the company, ask for their input, and they're too busy to ever get back to the buyer. The buyer may take a quick look and go, oh, there's just something not quite right. I got to get back to the rep, and they don't. So some of you may remember from that old sales book, the title of the book was Hope is Not a Strategy. So emailing a proposal and hoping the buyer will get back to us is not a good strategy. Much better, shown here on the second bullet, send an email that proposes another VC meeting where you can go over the proposal. This works nationally about 2/3 of the time. About a third of the time it won't work because it's a big box retailer, a large company, the government, etc. But in 2/3 of the cases, this works. So now when you get the buyer on this platform, VC platform, again, the salespeople have got to know how to bring up a document, modify that proposal in real time, get the buyer to sign electronically as appropriate. So I have covered some of the lessons learned from the last 3 recessions. I've covered the changing behavior of the buyers. And as you can see, in many cases, it's radical and dramatic changes. And I've covered how salespeople are responding. So I'm now going to turn it over to John, who's now going to cover how it affects marketing as well. So John, over to you, my friend.
All right, thank you, John, and thanks everybody for being here today. So I'm going to pick up where John left off. He teased digital presence, which is something that I'm going to definitely focus on here, but I'll start briefly with digital strategy. And I'll also start briefly with sharing what I consider to be the dirty little secret of B2B selling, which is that 70% of the job that salespeople used to do to create a customer, the buyer is now doing online by themselves. They are finding, researching, and pre-qualifying their short list of vendor options before those companies know that they are even being looked at. And COVID is only accelerating that situation. So another way to think about it is that what that means is that 70% of the work that customers are now doing now partly fall or largely fall into the domain of marketing. So we really need to sort of think about the fact that the line between sales and marketing is now permanently blurred. And where John focused on the digital selling side of the equation, which would be that 30% late sales cycle, late stage activity, how should we think about that initial 70% of that journey? We have a label for that, or a bucket. We call it digital presence. And I am going to talk about that, each of those elements here in more detail. But also understand that elite companies understand that you combine your digital presence, the stuff that happens at the early end of the sales cycle, with the digital selling, which happens at the late end, and you draw a circle around that whole thing, and that is your digital strategy. So you really want to end up with a plan that encompasses both of those. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 things you need to know around digital presence. So this is, again, that 30,000 foot view of that first part of the purchase process. The first one is, what is your domain authority? I'm going to talk about more of this here in a moment, but it is a single success metric, KPI, that really indicates what Google thinks of you, for example. So it helps determine where you're going to land in search results, and are you going to be above or below your competitors. And you also want to know what that score is for your competitors in terms of that same thing. Second, and we want to understand, do we have the right content that is going to engage and motivate buyers at the right time in their buying journey? The right piece of content delivered at the right time. For example, we're a great company. We've been around 40 years, and people love us. That's very good sales content to deliver. But if they don't yet understand what problem they have, or whether you can solve it and at what price, and whether they need it now, talking about that at too early of a stage is a total misfire. So we really want to make sure that that stuff is aligned. In addition to that, we want to understand who's following us on social media. Are we engaging with the right people? Do we have the right content that's of interest to them? And how does that engagement level, and I'll focus probably more specifically on LinkedIn here in a bit, how do we compare with our competitors on those same platforms? Next, is our website better, worse, or the same as our competitors across what we look at as both quantitative and qualitative dimensions? And then finally, do we or our competitors employ what we call best practices technologies like marketing automation and CRM and other tools for tracking and optimization to help take all that hard work that we did to identify customers, engage with them, convert them into leads, get them into the sales cycle, and ultimately turn them into closed won revenue. So we want to make sure we're thinking about all 5 of those areas in more detail. So let's start with domain authority. It is, as I mentioned, probably the single best success metric that's out there in order to determine your reputation online, especially with Google. It is a lot like you're probably like, if you think about it, your credit score. The higher the score, the more money you can borrow, the more cheaply. So we use this as really kind of our first proxy in terms of taking a look at what a client's domain authority score might be and maybe 5 or 6 named competitors. And we want to get a quick look and see, who's earned more reputation at this point. Your score is your score. I would never look at a score and say it's bad or good. It only is where you are today. The good news is that once you know what that is and you know what your competitors' scores are, you can work hard to move up the line. The things that go into it, it's a variety of factors. It's the quality of the content that's perceived to be on your website, the quality of the websites that are pointing to you with their votes, basically sending their traffic to your website because they feel like you've got good content for whatever the subject matter is there, the reputation of the authors, how's the website constructed. There's a lot of sort of factors that go into it. But the score itself is done on a logarithmic basis. It is from 0 to 100. I always tell people that for most companies, you don't need to worry about being in the 90s because that's where Facebook and Google live. You don't need to worry about being in the 80s because that's where big media companies are. You don't even need to worry about being into the 70s and the 60s. Those are going to be your bigger e-commerce platforms and software as a service companies. For the companies that we typically work with, the ones that are fighting it out in a specific niche or in a specific category, if you can get a domain score of about 45 or higher, you are going to consistently outrank your competitors for those very same search terms and phrases. So what does it mean then when we look at search? Because that's really where we're kind of ending up next. Data shows that buyers are going to perform at least 12 searches prior to engaging with your brand and your website. So for that reason, 65% of companies have an overt keyword and SEO strategy in order that they can perform well or better in search. But for the elite competitors, we find that they know very specifically where are they showing up in search, which pages in search, 1 through 10, each with 10 search results, so 1 to 100. They know what the keyword terms are that they're being found for, and they know the landing pages that traffic is going to. In addition, they know that same information about their competitors. So a couple of metrics to think about. One is that they typically will be ranked for thousands of search terms, but 700 of those search terms are what we call that land on page 1 of search. That's critical because if you use search like most people, 95% of you will not go on to page 2 of a search result. So regardless of how many page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 result terms you have, it's the ones that are on page 1 that are going to drive the great majority of traffic. That traffic for elite companies, typically, and we've looked at hundreds of different companies, the median score is about 20,000 visitors a month for organic search. And these are for B2B companies. So if you're a B2C, your numbers are even higher than that. The other thing that we tend to look for and find with elite competitors is that there's a nice balance between what we call early stage non-branded search terms. These are the bleeding neck problems where they're typing in a pain point or they're trying to identify a benefit. They're not looking for you yet. They're just trying to get a solution or an answer to a question or a problem. And we want to be found for those. And the elite companies are generating about 40% of their traffic from that. The other 60% is coming from what we call branded traffic. So these are people that are literally typing in some form of your brand name in order to get to you. They already know who you are. They already know what you do. They just don't know what your URL is. So anyway, a lot of companies are going to be in the 90 or 95% for branded traffic, and they're only going to be 5% for non-branded. So we really want to try and strike a nice balance. It's not a bad thing to have a high level of branded traffic. That's really the proxy for all of the other work that you do online and offline and trade shows and associations or groups. I mean, people know you in a number of different ways, but we really do want to have a nice mix of early stage and late stage buyers. So whether or not you pay a lot of attention or need to domain authority and search, and certain companies are going to prioritize those higher than others. One thing that 100% of companies are going to need to care about is content, because content is what buyers consume at each stage of the purchase process, right? So, on average, we know that 82% of B2B buyers are going to engage with at least 5 pieces of content on your website. 69% of companies for that reason have a documented search strategy. And up to 84% of companies actually outsource some form of content development because they know they want to get it right and they want to get it well developed and in the hands of buyers. So, what makes an elite performer different? Well, they understand what content they want to deliver at which point in the purchase process, right? So in the early stage where we want to grow brand awareness, we're looking at things like blog content and social media. Next to that, we want to start to convert leads. And there we're using landing pages and what I call lead magnet content like e-guides. They also know how to advance and qualify leads once they get them by distributing content through email nurture campaigns and the like. And then finally, they know what content they need in order to help the salespeople close deals at the very end. These are things like white papers and case studies and ROI calculators and testimonials and things like that. So anyway, understanding who your buyer is, understanding their persona, understanding where they are in the purchase process, understanding that 70% of the time they're doing the research themselves. What have we made available to them that they can consume in order to more easily buy from us? Next, we'll take a quick look at social media. Data shows that 75% of B2B buyers use social media to inform part of the purchase process when they're making decisions. In particular, LinkedIn has been demonstrated to be 277% more effective than other social media channels in terms of generating leads. So for that reason, our attention pretty quickly goes to LinkedIn for most people. We looked at those hundreds of companies and we found that the elite performers, the median number of followers that they had were about 5,600. They have that number of followers because they are posting multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day. Their employees are amplifying company posts by spreading that same content out horizontally into their own personal networks. They're making really good use of photos and video. And video in particular is something that is growing, not just because of the viralness of it, but one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that the second most popular search engine on the planet behind Google is actually YouTube. So we really want to be keeping an eye on what kind of video content we're producing for our prospects and customers. In terms of the website, we have basically several things going on. First of all, the single biggest problem that we see with most websites is that 80% of B2B buyers are going to visit a website, your website, before making a purchase decision, but only 20% of websites that are out there are really built to help advance the purchase process. Most of the content on those sites is about the company itself. Again, ignoring the fact that people are researching all those pain points. What are they finding and what's missing? We took a look at the elite companies. They typically have hundreds of pages of content on their website. They have a median number of 15,000 backlinks. These are people who are pointing back to your website because they value your content enough to put a link to it. And then finally, we see strong technical indicators on the site. They understand and have the fact that pages need to load very, very quickly. In fact, Google is going to put a priority on speed of page load starting in May of 2021. They also understand how the technical indicators around search engine optimization, meta tags, and all the kind of stuff that really kind of speak to Google. so that Google can understand the nature of the content on the page. They also are really good at mobile optimization, so they're very high in terms of what we call mobile friendliness scores. And then finally, they're secure. So they've got HTTPS, and they're doing some other things to help kind of ensure that the user experience is safe on websites. So anyway, when we tend to look at websites, we're looking for these kinds of factors, and there are certain metrics that we know will help determine whether or not people are successful or not. And then the final one that I have here is technology, and this is really sort of a bucket of items. This is essentially what's going on after you've done all the hard work. You've earned that domain reputation, you're higher in search results, people are clicking on it. Whether they're clicking or not, or just getting to your website directly, they're engaging with great content. The user experience on the content is really, really good. They raise their hand, they download something, you get their demographic and firmographic information. Now you're in a position to start to promote to them. Salespeople don't scale. 80% of these people may still be in some part of the research process. So what are we doing to nurture them using tools like marketing automation, Acton, HubSpot, Pardot, tools like that? And is that tool connected to your CRM? So like a Salesforce, so that you can get a 360-degree view of the entire purchase process. In fact, when those tools are connected together properly, you can identify that somebody first came in from a tweet, came to your website, identify eventually who they were, then follow everything they do on your website, marketing and leads, qualify them, get it over into the sales CRM so the salespeople could now take a look at it, understand exactly what they did to get there, open up an opportunity, put a dollar value against it, and ultimately close that opportunity. And at the end of the day, you can take a look at your marketing investment at the very beginning to get the tweet, all the way down to the sale and testimonial at the end, draw a circle around that, and understand the return on investment. So if your competitors are doing this and you are not doing that, you're going to be further challenged. If you are doing it and they aren't, you're going to have a significant advantage. The only other thing I would add that we look for is what are we doing on the website through tracking code like Google Analytics, which is basically the price of entry. But what other tracking code might we see on there, like LinkedIn Insights and Facebook audiences and other things? Understanding that if we have those tracking codes, we can optimize the cross-channel experience between our website and those properties and back. And in addition, we also understand that analytics will tell you the what, but they won't tell you the why. So we also look for things like Hotjar, which is an example of a program that does heat mapping, so we can see where people's eyes and mice and what are they clicking on the page, why are they bailing out. But they're also doing surveys. They're talking to customers and asking what works and what doesn't. And finally, they're doing a lot of A/B testing, right? It's all about conversion, what works and what doesn't. So we really want to see a combination of those factors. So, in summary, companies that do these 5 things well will consistently outperform the competition. And it doesn't need to be that hard. Everything that I shared with you, I could discover about your company today with the tools that we have in place. And in fact, we'd be happy to provide those scores to you. And we can identify all of these data points for your competitors as well. And so what does that mean? Well, one quote I like to use: plagiarism is the sincerest form of internet, right? So if you've got competitors that are hitting the ball out of the park, if you have these attribution and tracking tools and you can understand where you are relative to them and what they're doing and what you're not, it's very easy and quick to start to replicate their best practices in order to be able to catch up with them and then ultimately surpass them in your market space. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Barry and John and talk about some action items. John, welcome back.
So thank you, John. As we wait for John Asher to come back to us live, there he is. Great. I know that you've pulled out several action items for different types of roles in the company, and that's, I think, where you want to go to now. So please go for that.
All right, let's start with that potential action items from what I covered for salespeople. One obviously would be increase your personal digital presence. A way to get there pretty quickly is get Sales Navigator and Crystal Knows, as I've got highlighted there. And become an expert user on VC platforms. The buyers actually expect this now. They expect us to be really good on these. And of course, resist emailing proposals And right above that, think about those various ways to close a deal now that are somewhat different. And the reason they're different is because of the buyer's uncertainty about the future and the restricted cash flow. So we go to the next slide. Here's some potential action items for sales leaders. So hold more frequent sales meetings and help your salespeople, help them get the ability to use Crystal Nose and Sales Navigator. It takes an investment, obviously. You want them to, so you as a sales leader have to be in charge of getting your salespeople the training so they could be great on Zoom. And just broad surveys, when sales managers, CEOs, and others are listening in or to phone calls by their salespeople or VC calls, and then give coaching, you get a significant lift rate. So 36% average over all the companies that do it. We do it. It's great. So we have 4 executives, 7 salespeople, all involved in sales one way or the other. And some of them will listen in on my sales calls, and the feedback is great. And then the last 2 bullets, as a sales manager, we're always, part of our job is to understand the professional challenges of our salespeople, as you can see what they are today. But there's a little but with this, and that is when you look at the last bullet, in many cases, our salespeople are home. They've got kids to homeschool. They got their spouse at home, or maybe their spouse is traveling. And so the personal and professional challenges they have just get intertwined. One of our sales rep has 3 small kids. One has special needs. Her husband is gone frequently. Her mother has Alzheimer's. So we as a company have to really help her organize her calendar, help her essentially with everything. So it's a special time in a pandemic. We can't just ignore their personal life because it's so integrated with their professional life. All right, I think John Edwards will take it back over for a couple of other lists.
Yeah, so I mentioned this before. Thank you, John. Get your digital presence benchmark scores and compare them against competitors. Again, that's something that we can certainly help you with. Know and understand and track high impact KPIs. Domain authority is one that I highlighted today. The key is that if you measure it, you can manage it. So, once you understand what it is, let's put a strategy in place to increase it. Implement or update your keyword strategies for 2021 to address both early and late stage search terms. It's important to meet people on both of those. Identify content gaps. A lot of companies understand the path to purchase, but if you sit down and you sort of deconstruct it and you say, okay, well, do we have a piece of content for that particular question that needs to get answered at the stage? Do we have it? And oftentimes it's missing. So we want to make sure we understand what those are and think about what investments we need to make in order to complete those. We want to share keyword information rich content informed by those keyword strategies on social media platforms, particularly LinkedIn, and also on our website. We want to implement a formal employee amplification program. I didn't mention this, but the social media platform, you absolutely want to be active and present on your company page, but likes and shares are even more highly rewarded for personal likes and shares. So the fact that the company posts it and then you share and retweet it is what's really going to have a quick impact. Make sure your website scores high on those technical indicators that I talked about. Speed, which will be critically important as we head into this year. SEO, mobile friendliness, and security. There are metrics. It is a measurable thing, and they can be improved. And then finally, it's the application of those best practices, marketing automation tools to engage in qualified leads, connecting them to CRM so we can close the loop on the sales side, and then tracking tools that really help us optimize cross-channel experiences. And so if you were to roll it all up together, right, the stuff that John talked about on the digital selling side, the stuff that I've introduced on the digital presence or marketing side, let's increase that investment in sales and marketing. That was a lesson that John shared early on in terms of companies that succeeded during challenging times. Second, let's reevaluate our sales and marketing processes. If digital selling and marketing are not aligned, let's get that strategy in place. that we talked about briefly. Again, once we do that, let's boost our digital presence. Let's start to fire on those cylinders so we can get more people earlier on in the buyer journey. John mentioned buying smaller or weaker competitors. That could be a strong opportunity for you right now. Innovation, which had that 4x return on investment versus companies that didn't introduce new offers and innovate. Invest in mobile apps, make it easier for buyers to buy from you, and make it easier for them to buy from you using the tools that they're using. More than half of the traffic on the web is now mobile based. Those short automated demos are very popular with buyers now. Make it easier for them to buy from you online in general. And then internally, think about holding more frequent leadership meetings, especially cross-functional meetings between sales, marketing, and other organizations. And then assist your remote salespeople both professionally and personally. And then finally, develop that overall digital strategy for your company that combines all of the pieces that we talked about today. So with
That's
that,
outstanding, gentlemen. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes left, and a few questions have come in that we might be able to get to in time. I will tell everybody that if we do not get to your question, we will be happy to email you answers, or you can reach out to one of the speakers directly. Their addresses will be coming up on the last slide. But the first question, and John Asher, this is probably best suited for you. What new challenges do salespeople face with buying teams that are all spread out? I suppose the thinking being that it used to be you'd get a buying committee around the table for a presentation, and that's no longer really the case. So what advice would you have in that case?
Barry, you're supposed to give me the softballs, remember? So it's very interesting. Sales cycle times for the so-called enterprise sales are actually reduced. And the reason is there's no longer a need to wait till the salesperson can fly from Columbus to Chicago. There's no need to wait to try to get everybody in the same conference room physically, maybe one or two fly in. So now those sales cycle times actually are being reduced because you could get teams that are widely dispersed all on one Zoom meeting. So it's one of the few things that has actually improved in this pandemic.
Great, thank you. This next question, I'm sure either one of you can weigh in on, maybe starting with John Asher. Are you seeing a pickup in video demonstrations for products that used to be demonstrated live?
Yes, definitely. And not only that, but also automated demos. And again, the buyers, since they're experiencing the VR and AR in their personal lives, they're expecting that now, and in their B2C interactions, they're expecting that now in the B2B demos as well.
I'll just quickly add to that and go back to what John Asher also said earlier, which is understand whether or not the video is going to be most effective or whatever the presentation is going to be most effective standalone, meaning you as a salesperson isn't there, or whether or not it's even more effective if it's complemented with the presence of a salesperson. I think you want to think through that too.
And you can literally ask the buyer, which do they want? The demo, the automated demo, or the automated demo with the sales rep?
Mm-hmm. Very good. This question, maybe John Edwards is ripe for this one. What does a logical progression plan look like for a company that's low on the technology implementation scale? Basically, Microsoft Office for everything. How do you move towards the ideal model that you described, CRM, analytics, remote support?
Yeah, well, first of all, the tracking tools are fairly easy to implement, right? So the Google Analytics code is a little snippet of code, you can add it. Some of the other social platforms, that's what I would kind of put easy, low hanging fruit kind of thing. I think you can start to get audience insights almost immediately. Now, again, that begins on your website. So I think the next thing is, does the website sort of match the expectations of what buyers want or need when they get to it? So I think those are two areas to start, because in a hub and spoke world, the website online is the hub. So, let's begin the journey there. On the tools side, there are kind of two progression paths. One is you could go from really no formal email marketing software to something low end or kind of, what I'll call sort of mass push software like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact. Some companies are already utilizing those. And then from there, get your list together, build your audience, and then advance into marketing automation, which is really where I think you want to end up in the long run. And ideally end up with that connected to your CRM. If you had to choose between a CRM and marketing automation, again, always begin with the customer. I mean, CRM is a customer, relationship management tool. So I would probably look to try and get one of those in place. If not first, at least at the same time as I was looking to implement these communications. Ultimately, you want a 360-degree view of your customers. And it really requires, ideally, all of those things in place to ultimately be effective.
So John, I may be a little out of date on this, but when you're really starting with the search, should you start with pay-per-click to get a big boost in the beginning and then slowly let the SEO take over? That's still the right
It's a
advice?
great question. Yeah, it's a great question. Pay-per-click gets you on page 1 tomorrow or today. So it is very effective. It's also a very high feedback loop. So if you want to see what I should be investing in from the organic side to ultimately get on page 1, you can start with paid. But yes, that is the way to sort of leapfrog your competitors if you want to get on page 1. It is a bit like gasoline. It's it's a spend. Once you stop spending, it's gone. So on the flip side, yeah, you do that first but then organic. Everybody calls that free search, and nobody that gets on page 1 of Google search gets there for free. But once you get there, it's very hard to be knocked off. So I think of that as more an investment. So one's a marathon and one's a sprint. You can do both at the same time while you're investing in the organic terms, creating great content, getting the reputation, people pointing to you. If we need to be there tomorrow, we've got a new product introduction, we want to enter a new market, let's use pay-per-click to get there today, and then have a long-term plan for how we're going to stay there tomorrow with the organic search.
Okay, we have several other questions that have rolled in, but we really only have time for this last one that I'll put out. And again, we'll follow back up on the other ones. But John Edwards, what is the best way to increase your domain authority score?
The best way to do it is going to be having a nice level of content that is probably greater. The highest correlation that we see between low domain authority and low score is sites with 10, 12, 15 pages of content. There's not a blog on there, which is a very effective and fast way for Google to understand the value of content. The content that they might have on there is in PDF form. So I think what you really want to do is, if there's a single correlation, the more content you have, and then obviously the better that content is, the faster and the higher your score will go.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been great to hear from both of you. And I'd like to thank each of our attendees today for joining us. You will receive an email with a link to a recording of this webinar, so you have it to share or reference later on. And we'll also be sure to alert you to other Think events that we hold throughout the year. Of course, if you have any marketing or sales challenges that you'd like to discuss, if the contact information on the next slide here, we'd be happy to answer any questions or help in any way. John Edwards, if you could advance one slide so that we have those. There we go. Thank you. So there's John Edwards and John Asher's email addresses. And of course, if you have a Communica contact, we would be delighted to help you in any way. So thank you all for coming. Stay healthy, Happy New Year, and good luck moving your business forward.
So Barry, I have one final comment. Many of you know I have a submarine background, so when you're really finished, you surface the sub and come back into port, and the surfacing alarm sounds like this: beluga, beluga, beluga. It'll probably come as no surprise that I have an authentic submarine diving alarm in my office. So everybody ready to end the meeting? Here we go. All right, we're done.
Thank you, everyone.